This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where I'm speaking to holistic funeral director Holly Lyon-Hawk. It's not easy for most of us, at least here in the West, to talk about end of life, death and funeral arrangements. And yet it's such an important thing to prepare for. It's unavoidable, it needn't be frightening or taboo, and it is something that we can make easier for ourselves and our loved ones if we start a conversation around it whilst we still can. In the interview, Holly talks about her approach and about what options are open to those of us who love nature and gardens. And I expect you'll find what we talk about sometimes surprising and also reassuring to know that there are alternative options. To begin with, Holly describes her route to becoming a holistic funeral director.
Yes, it was completely by accident. I don't think there are many people that sort of set out at primary school thinking this is the work that they want to do, but I'm sure there are some. But I originally was a veterinary nurse, so I grew up on a farm and love the outdoors, love animals, and so that seemed the natural progression for me. And then I had my son, and so I decided to be a stay-at-home mum. I come from a family of artists, my mum and my older brother, very accomplished artists. And it was during this time that I played around with painting and sculpting, and I discovered I had a gift for it as well. So I then went on to be an animal artist, predominantly sculptures. And then it was during that, and as my son got older, then my grandfather died, and we didn't have a particularly great experience with the whole thing. We were very unaware. We didn't know what our rights were. We didn't understand the dying process, etc. And I came across a group called Living Well, Dying Well, and they're amazing, and they train end-of-life doulas. So I was just absolutely blown away by this, and I thought, wow, I've got to do that. So I went and trained with them, and it was just wonderful. And then it was a natural progression to getting in touch with the Natural Death Centre, which is currently run by Rosie Inman Cook, who is just incredible at all that she does to help maintain openness and honesty for families. And I realised that on this journey, it was quite a long journey, that actually, maybe you could bring elements of the pre-death into so it could be one complete. So you're looking after somebody before they die, during, and then afterwards as well. So you're supporting the family through the whole journey. And that really struck me as a sensible way and a natural way to do things. So yes, I did my training. I trained down in Totnes with a wonderful green funeral directors down there. It was Jane and Simon who ran that. Really lovely people. So yes, that's in a nutshell, kind of, it snowballed really from small seeds into big trees. Yes.
Yeah, and I think you are so right. One of my bugbears is that we don't have important conversations around death. There's such a lot of taboo. I think so many people are caught out when they experience it personally. They don't know what to expect. So that's a really important part of it. Also, as you mentioned, the funerals, how you can kind of govern that yourself, what input you can have, what input the family can have. And so thinking about funerals in particular, how might you approach them differently to maybe what people kind of expect to be the norm, as it were?
I like to put everything back into the hands of the families, really. So rather than starting with, right, these are the packages that I offer, we sit down, I get to know them first, get to hear their story. Quite often I'm the first independent person that they're sharing the story with, of their journey to there. And so often it can be a really difficult journey. So just giving, I think the first thing is time. Time is so precious, and it's so important, I feel, that I'm able to give the families I support as much time as possible, but also to really get to know them so that I can best support them in creating a ceremony honouring the life of the person that's died that's going to suit them, rather than what's going to fit my structure best. But also, again, it's about helping people to be aware of all their options so that they can then make a choice. Because if we don't know all our options, we can't make a choice. So for many people, they don't know that you don't have to legally use a funeral director. You can do the entire thing yourself. Most people do require one because of logistics, but equally you can keep and care for and look after somebody at home after they've died. There are ways of doing that that are really simple and can be a really precious and sacred time to help the family process the death and be able to say their goodbyes. And we used to do this once upon a time, before the NHS really came along. Most people would die at home, surrounded by their families, be cared for at home, and then they'd go off after a few days for their burial. So it's sort of bringing to life, if you like, some of the old ways, but incorporating them in a way that people can connect with now.
I didn't know that actually. So that's one thing I've learned already. I expect there's going to be many more. I guess there are lots of misconceptions around funerals and the dying process. What are some of the more common ones that people like myself kind of go, oh, wow, I had no idea you could do that or couldn't do that?
Well, most people aren't aware that they don't have to use a funeral director. And I think that one is really, really important because despite the fact that 99.5% of people will use one, just by knowing that fact puts the person back in some level of control because, when it comes to it, we're in a very vulnerable position when we're grieving. And even if a death is expected, there's an element of shock and disbelief that it's finally happened. And the body responds in ways. So we're not making judgments as easily as we would do normally. So I always advise families to go and interview their prospective funeral directors, go and have a chat with them, get to know them, ask them, could they, if they wanted to help care for the person who's died, wash and dress and bless and things like that, would they support them in doing that? One of the big ones that most people don't know about is that you don't have to have a funeral ceremony with a coffin present at just a crematorium or a church. You can have it anywhere. So I've supported families over the years at village halls, in their homes, in their gardens, in marquees, and wedding venues during the week, which are quite often not being used. We use those, and it's just wonderful because you get the opportunity to then, again, it's all about time. You can slow everything down. You're not limited to a half hour 45-minute service. You've got time to decorate the place. You've got everybody staying in that one place. So it's not broken up along the way of everybody arriving. Then they go into the crematorium and then they have the service and they come out and then they have to go on to somewhere else for the reception afterwards. So everybody's in one place. And so there you get some beautiful conversations that flow and happen through that as well. And again, it just makes it less austere. And for many people now, it is honouring the life and celebrating the life that was lived as well. So it's not just a mournful experience. Yes, it is sad in most cases, but it's a little bit like a roller coaster, so you've got your happy memories, but even with your happy memories, you can feel sad as well. But that doesn't have to be in a place that feels very utilitarian and you're limited with time. So that's another one. Yes, lots more, but yeah, I could go
I'm
on
sure.
forever. Yes.
But that was interesting what you said about doing it somewhere that's different. So, example, a garden. A lot of people listening will be really attached to their garden or an outdoor space. So, obviously, you can incorporate that into a service or a ceremony, whatever you choose to have. And I'm thinking, are there any other ways that a garden or a love of gardening could be incorporated into a funeral that people might not have thought of?
So many ways. I think it's endless, really. But one thing that most people aren't aware of is that you can, if you own your own home, you can be buried in your garden if you want to. So, yes, you just have to contact your local authority and just check for watercourses, etc. And it does have to go on the deeds of the house. So, access to the grave could be an issue. But for some people, if they've got a big enough garden, I have helped a few families have their relatives buried on their land, and that's a lovely thing to do. But also, you've got, for many people, I think it's over 70% now of funerals or cremations. So many people are left with ashes. So you could have a beautiful area in your garden where the ashes go. Now, the ashes are very caustic to the earth. So there is actually on Scattering Ashes, a website who do many urns and things. They've got this special soil that helps to counteract that. So you can actually plant alongside the ashes as well. But yes, having a funeral ceremony with the coffin present in the garden is a wonderful thing, I think, because you've got, the sounds of nature, being out in the garden. It's the smell, it's the sounds, it's just absolutely beautiful. And I encourage families to, yes, they can have shop bought flowers to decorate the coffin, but also collecting foliage and flowers depending on the season. Wintertime, you can have some really lovely displays with evergreens and things that you can weave into, especially if you've got a woven coffin, which are rather beautiful, and especially if they're made in England, they're absolutely lovely and very eco-friendly. But you can decorate them and make them look absolutely beautiful. I helped a family this week actually, and the lady who died was a hop picker, and she absolutely loved hops. So her basket was just swathed with dried hops, and it was just looked beautiful.
How lovely. I mean, God, my mind is blown. I didn't realise you could be buried in your garden. And in actual fact, I kind of tongue in cheek, because I haven't really thought about what I want personally, but I kind of know that I'm not that worried, because for me, once I'm gone, I'm kind of gone. But I did say tongue in cheek on Twitter once that I wondered if I could be composted. And somebody actually phoned me, and Humera, if you're listening, hello. She phoned me and we had a conversation about all the silly things that we do around death and dying and funerals and everything. And she said, well, yeah, why couldn't you be composted? And I said, well, because a fox might probably come along, and it probably wouldn't be that hygienic. But thinking about it, there might be other ways of doing it. And in actual fact, I interviewed somebody who was speaking about biochar, and they said that they wouldn't mind going into a burner and then that becoming biochar. But, I've kind of always half jokingly said these things, but actually it sounds as if that could be a reality.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are many ways, new ways that are always being sort of looked into as to how we can care for the body once we've gone. But one of them is water resumation as well. So that's breaking down the body. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's alkaline or something like that. But yes, and you end up with, again, a similar kind of ash that you would with a standard cremation. But yes, when you're being buried in your garden, again, you just have to make sure that minimum level of soil on top is 3.5 feet. And then you're safe from, but you can't have more than, I think it's 2 or 3 people in one garden. Otherwise, then it turns into a cemetery and you have to apply for change of use, etc. Okay. So, 1 or 2 people is absolutely fine in the garden. But yeah, there are many things out there. One thing that I would think would really resonate with gardeners are natural burial grounds. So cremation isn't great for our environment at all. It can be very helpful because many families are dispersed across the world, and some can have some ashes here and some ashes there, but actually for our land, our earth, Mother Earth, it's not good. So to look on the natural death site, and there's a list there of recommended natural burial grounds. Now, natural burial, there are so many, again, misconceptions as to what a natural burial is. So it's not just a cemetery that advertises that you can be buried with a tree, because what is important is that what makes a difference and makes it green is that the body is buried to just a depth of 3.5 feet below the earth and not 6 feet. And that's so that you've got aerobic decomposition that happens. If it's any deeper, you don't have that microbial action, and then that releases more methane into the atmosphere. So again, it's finding out and doing your research and just finding out whether the natural burial ground really has ecology, plants and animals at the heart of what they're about.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point too. And actually was one of my later questions. So talking as if we would have the luxury of knowing that either we would die or a loved one was. And if we did, is talking about your funeral wishes a really good conversation to have?
Absolutely, absolutely. Over the years, it's been heartbreaking to have families that I've been supporting who have had no idea what their relative wanted, and they're trying to second guess. And also, it gives those who are left behind a guide, a roadmap in a time when they're completely at sea and don't know up from down. They've got this guide to help them through. And they know, if it's all written down, they know that they're doing all the things that their relative wanted. And that brings incredible comfort, especially when you get fast, like you say, at Christmas and other holidays. You bring families together, and the dynamics can get a bit sticky sometimes. So when people are grieving and somebody's died within the family, those are kind of exaggerated. So there can be real discourse sometimes in what family members want for that person. So I say, from the age of 18, you really need to be writing down what your wishes are. Even as basic as the only thing that you write down or let your family know about is whether you want a burial or cremation. It can be incredibly helpful, yes.
Obviously, you mentioned writing. I'm guessing it's something that you could say, you have a conversation about, but actually if it's written, then it's, incontrovertible. Yeah. Is it necessary to maybe lodge that with a funeral director, or do you just kind of leave it in the hands of the people who will be carrying out your wishes?
So for many people, not all, but many people have maybe a folder at home where they keep all their sort of effects that are really important, that if something happened to them, their family could go to. And within that, actually, it's really important that you add your passwords and access and things like that to your digital legacy, which often gets forgotten about. But if you've got a real preference with regards to funeral directors and how you want your body to be treated, whether you want to be moved straight away or whether you'd like to stay at home for a night or two, then that's up to you then whether you leave it in their hands or you do that research beforehand. But yes, always write it down, and can just be on a blank piece of paper. You just scribble your notes down. This is what I want. And yeah, just make people aware of where you've put it if they need it.
I was just thinking back, actually, obviously we were talking about doing something in the garden. I suppose I romantically think, oh yeah, well, that would be lovely if the flowers were out and everything. How about like a winter funeral, kind of tying in nature with that? Is that as easy?
It's a little bit more of a challenge, but I mean, absolutely. I mean, some people really enjoy the elements, and again, that's part of the whole joy of gardening, isn't it? Is just being out in the elements. So, some people have had marquees in their garden, so you can have a marquee if the weather is not looking particularly good, so that you can have the ceremony in there. So how it works is if you weren't to be buried in your garden, and for most people they don't want to, but some do, and if you're going to be cremated or buried somewhere else. So normally I'd say if you had a natural burial, quite often the ceremony is there as well. But with a cremation, you could have the whole ceremony within your garden in the wintertime with your marquee if you wanted. I've had people who've had it in their homes before. Their homes have been big enough that they've been able to have that. And again, you don't have to have that many people present if you don't want to. You can have a very intimate affair too. But then after the ceremony and everybody then joins together and maybe has a few refreshments and carry on reminiscing, then the coffin can either stay there for a while and be taken back to the funeral directors for the night. And then maybe the next day you go and have a very short committal service at the crematorium, or the coffin goes off for what's known as a direct cremation. So I always say to families, it's almost like the curtain. When the curtains close, that's it. You say goodbye. You don't know what goes on after that. So the moment the coffin leaves the venue, the garden, whatever, and is taken away, is taken straight to the crematorium. But family don't necessarily have to go to that. So yeah, lots of options.
And kind of taking a step back, I always think that as gardeners, maybe we have a slight advantage because we're so tied into the seasons and kind of life and death and natural cycles and everything. Is that something that would be useful in terms of the dying process, do you think? And in fact, do you use reference to anything like natural cycles in that whole process?
I think they're really, really important. And I sense that the majority of people's disconnect from the cycles is one of the reasons why there is so much anxiety and depression that's going on at the moment. But also, yeah, because being out in nature with those cycles, you see very clearly spring, birth, the joy of summer, and then going through to autumn and winter. So it's really, really important. And actually, the more we can connect in with that and the moon cycles, we are cyclical, and we are also So many of us end up kind of thinking that we're separate from nature, but we are nature as well. So we are part of that. And the more that we can connect to just how gentle those cycles are, how normal they are, how natural, and that we are part of that, we're integral to that, and it doesn't have to be scary as well. So yes, it definitely be used in helping us to prepare. And I would recommend that everybody spend time thinking about what their beliefs are, whether they believe the soul continues after our bodies have died, or whether they think that's it, or, but yesterday actually at a funeral, and I read out the first law of thermodynamics. It's not verbatim, but you can't create or destroy energy. It simply changes form. There is that finite amount, and it just changes from one form to another. So whether we believe in consciousness continuing, or whether we believe that we just literally become part of nature, we are energy and we are part of all of that.
Thank you, Holly. I hope you found this episode informative and it's been thought-provoking. It is worth checking out Holly's websites and starting the conversation. Thank you to you for listening. And of course, to finish up, we have the fantastic Dr. Ian Bedford, who, appropriately, is championing the rights of bugs to live their lives and be part of the natural cycle.
It wasn't too long ago when almost every creature that landed, crawled or nibbled on a plant in our gardens was regarded as a pest and usually eradicated. Nowadays, though, in light of Britain's declining biodiversity and our greater understanding of ecosystems, we're much more likely to be welcoming wildlife into our gardens and being a bit more tolerant of the bugs that feed on our plants, knowing the vital role they play in underpinning nature's food chains. However, it's not to say that there won't be occasions when the damage those bugs cause to certain plants becomes unacceptable, and that something might need to be done to resolve it. But that's absolutely fine if the solution involves methods that don't harm the environment or the other creatures that are found within it, particularly the predators and parasites of the problematic bugs. And thankfully, there are now many tried and tested methods and products that could be safely used in wildlife-friendly gardens that could help reduce harmful infestations of those plant-eating bugs, all of which provide an alternative to the chemical-based pesticides that, although banned for garden use in some European countries, are still available for use here in Britain. Non-toxic alternatives, such as plant-friendly spray nozzles that deliver fine yet powerful jets of water to dislodge the infestation, or proprietary formulations of surfactants that effectively wash the delicate sap-sucking bugs such as aphids from the plants, or foliar sprays that contain natural ingredients like calcium, which simply deter creatures from feeding on treated plants. And these innocuous spray options can also be used, if required, in conjunction with physical barriers, such as netting or horticultural fleece, which could then prevent bugs from infesting the plants in the first place, or by using barriers placed around the base of plants that prevent the eggs of root-feeding bugs being laid into the soil, barriers such as plant collars or non-absorbent mulches, which ultimately break the infestation cycle of root flies and vine weevils. And then there's the natural solution, which basically leaves the management of plant-eating bugs in the hands, or rather mouths, of the predators and parasites. The beneficial creatures who, when plentiful, will create a balanced system where the plant bugs are far less likely to develop into harmful infestations. Beneficial creatures that can always be encouraged into gardens simply by not using toxic chemicals and by having plants, shrubs, trees, and a source of water such as a bird bath. And then perhaps some suitable habitat boxes that will provide shelter and safe breeding sites. And not forgetting a succession of flowering plants too, which, besides bees, will also attract hoverflies and the parasitic wasps, who ensure their larvae are in amongst the plant bug infestations, devouring them from the outside in or the inside out, and allowing us to watch our plants develop and survive in the way that nature intended.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.